Hello, Taurus. Thank you for pausing here today. In the middle of a world that rarely slows down, the fact that you chose to spend a few quiet minutes in this space already means something. Today, we're going to look at a love story, but not in a dramatic or exaggerated way. This is simply a gentle reflection on a shift that may be unfolding around you. So listen with your own intuition. If something touches your heart, keep it. If it doesn't resonate, just let it pass. Take a slow breath and allow yourself to connect with the energy of this moment. For some of you, there may be someone who's been on your mind more than usual. They may not be entirely new. In fact, you might have crossed paths before, in a different chapter of your life, as a different version of yourself. But this time, it feels deeper. It's not necessarily a dramatic spark. It's more like a quiet recognition, a glance that lingers just a little longer, a sense of ease you can't quite explain, a familiarity so natural that you don't feel the need to prove anything when you're around them. And what makes this different is that the connection doesn't stop at emotion. It begins to touch your choices, the plans you once built so carefully, the priorities you once placed at the very top. When someone feels truly understood, when they feel steady inside a connection that feels real, they may start questioning the world they built before. Not because that world was wrong, but because it may no longer reflect what their heart is quietly searching for. So today, we're going to explore that shift a little more deeply. Why Taurus energy can create such a powerful inner realignment, and why, in certain moments of life, someone might find themselves rethinking everything just to move a little closer to you. That sense of relief may seem small, but sometimes it becomes the starting point for very deep change. I've seen it unfold in very ordinary, everyday stories. A friend of mine used to live at a relentless pace. Her schedule was so packed there wasn't even room for a slow dinner. She once told me that success felt like a moving train, and if you didn't jump on in time, you'd be left behind. So she kept running, for years, until she met someone whose energy felt very much like Taurus. Not loud, not full of grand promises. But every time she was around him, she no longer felt the need to prove she was worthy. She didn't have to list her accomplishments. She didn't have to wear her busyness like a badge. She could simply sit and be heard. At first, it was just coffee dates that lasted longer than expected. Then evenings where she didn't check her email every few minutes. And one day, she realized she was quietly reconsidering the life rhythm she once thought was non-negotiable. No one asked her to change. No one pressured her. But standing on steady ground made her running shoes feel heavier. That's often how Taurus energy moves. It doesn't push. It doesn't pull anyone out of their life. It's simply there, steady like a wall clock ticking, like a kitchen light left on when you come home late. And when someone has grown used to unstable connections, that consistency can shift their entire perspective. They begin to ask themselves, what am I really protecting? A title, an image, or just a habit? I don't think a great resignation always looks dramatic. It rarely happens in one impulsive night. It's more like the tide, slowly pulling back. A little each day. Things once placed high on a pedestal begin to lower. Not because they've lost all value, but because another value is being recognized. Around Taurus, many people feel a kind of safety without conditions. You don't have to be your most polished version. You can be tired. You can be quiet. You can admit you don't have all the answers and still be allowed to stay. It sounds simple, but in a world where everyone is trying to upgrade themselves, optimize their life, refine their image, being permitted not to optimize starts to feel rare. Maybe that's why some people, when they encounter this presence, begin to weigh real trade-offs. They're not only thinking about emotion, they're thinking long-term. If I keep running toward what's familiar, am I overlooking a rare kind of peace? I don't believe anyone walks away from everything because of a single glance. But when that glance is paired with steadiness, with consistency, with someone who keeps showing up day after day, It creates a foundation, and when that foundation feels solid, people begin building big decisions on top of it. Taurus often doesn't realize the influence they have. They're simply living in alignment with what feels true to them, loyal to their values, not quick to shift direction with every passing wind. Yet that steadiness becomes something like a harbor. Ships that have drifted for years don't drop anchor immediately. They hesitate. They feel fear. They remember the thrill of open water. But once they experience the safety of shore, the idea of leaving again becomes harder. And eventually, the choice is no longer chase something new or cling to what's familiar. It becomes a much simpler question. What kind of life lets my heart feel lighter? Maybe that's why, in certain seasons of life, someone becomes willing to release old structures. Not because they're weak, not because they're enchanted, but because they've found a place that doesn't require them to be anyone else. If you're a Taurus, you may not be trying to create that effect. You're simply living at your own rhythm. But sometimes, that rhythm is exactly what makes someone pause, listen, and reconsider their entire journey. And when trust repeats itself long enough, it can quietly reshape how a person defines success, what they call security, and even how they begin to imagine their future. The future is often drawn in numbers, milestones, 5-year plans, 10-year plans. People talk about it like a map that must be completed. But when someone touches the stability deep enough, that map begins to be reviewed. Not to tear it up, just to quietly ask, what am I really walking toward? There are very ordinary evenings, no special event, no grand confession, just two people sitting beside each other in a room lit by a soft yellow lamp. One talks about a long workday, the other listens without interrupting. Silences don't feel awkward. They don't need to be filled with noise, and in moments that small, something subtle begins to shift. When someone is listened to long enough, they start to believe their feelings have weight. When someone is seen long enough, they stop wearing so many layers of armor. And when that happens, day after day, it becomes new ground. That ground isn't flashy, but it's steady. Taurus rarely builds through grand declarations. They build by still being there after difficult days, by keeping small promises, by remembering things that seem insignificant, like the fact that you prefer your coffee with less sugar, like knowing you need a little quiet after work. Ordinary details, but carefully held. When someone realizes they no longer have to over-explain themselves just to be understood, their image of the future begins to change. The success isn't only climbing higher, it can mean living deeper. Security isn't only a stable bank account. It can mean knowing someone won't leave when you're exhausted, so letting go doesn't feel like a leap. It feels more like setting down a heavy suitcase you've carried for too long. At first, your hands are numb because you're used to the weight. But slowly, your body feels lighter. I once heard someone say they never intended to change their life when they met a Taurus. They just wanted a simple relationship. But that simple connection offered something rare, the ability to slow down without falling behind. And once you understand what it feels like to move slowly and still move forward, changing direction doesn't feel as frightening. It isn't always smooth. There are internal struggles. My nights spent thinking about what might have to be released. Old habits have their own gravity. But in the middle of that tension, the feeling of being steady inside a real connection quietly returns. No pressure, no manipulation. Just a gentle question. If I could live more in rhythm with my own heart, would I choose it? Taurus energy seems to pose that question without ever saying it out loud. They don't drag anyone off their old path. They simply stand there as another option. A road with fewer bright lights, but firmer ground. And sometimes, what makes someone willing to let go of familiar structures isn't the desire to destroy them. It's the desire to rebuild, this time on ground that feels peaceful. Letting go no longer means loss. It becomes a release from expectations that no longer fit. Just like taking off a heavy coat when winter has already passed. There may still be hesitation at first, but then the sunlight touches your shoulders. and you realize you've stepped into a different season. After spending enough time near a Taurus, some people begin to imagine the future not only through ambition, but through feeling. They start asking themselves, what do I want to wake up to each morning? Pressure or steadiness, noise, or a rhythm that feels sustainable. And within those quiet reflections, the choice becomes clearer. No announcement, no dramatic declaration, just a small lean toward the place where they feel most themselves. From small moments like that, a foundation is built. And when that foundation feels solid enough, decisions that once seemed enormous begin to feel almost natural. Natural, like waking up one morning and no longer feeling the need to prove anything to the world. Natural, like beginning to say no to the things that once drained you and not carrying guilt for days afterward. The shift isn't loud. It shows up in small ways, in how someone rearranges their calendar, in choosing to stay home instead of attending a party that doesn't truly matter. Spend enough time near a Taurus, and you slowly grow familiar with an unhurried rhythm. At first, that rhythm can feel confusing, because you may have been used to rushing, grabbing opportunities, getting ahead, moving one step faster than everyone else. But when no one is pushing you, you begin to hear your own footsteps, not being pulled, not being pushed, just space. Space to ask a simple question: what do I actually want? Only Taurus doesn't create scarcity to make someone afraid of losing them. They don't use silence as strategy. Their calm isn't a psychological game. It's more like a river moving steadily, never needing to prove how deep it is, because the water is simply there, and that becomes the attraction. When someone doesn't feel manipulated or tested, they begin to relax. And once relaxed, they start to notice the tension that used to exist in other relationships, the unnecessary arguments, the guessing games, the evenings that ended in exhaustion. Around an energy that doesn't rush, you realize you don't have to sprint just to be kept. You can pause mid-sentence, take a few seconds before responding, and not fear being misunderstood. Silence stops feeling dangerous. It becomes shelter. Say it, the warm kitchen with the scent of fresh bread doesn't need a sign out front. It just needs to exist long enough for someone to remember how to find their way back. And once you grow used to that scent, other places, even more glamorous ones, can start to feel strangely unfamiliar. Some people once believed they loved intensity. They said they were drawn to passion, to challenge, to emotional highs. But when their heart is finally placed in a space without constant turbulence, they realize something unexpected. They weren't addicted to passion. They were just used to noise. Peace isn't boring. It simply asks for a certain maturity to recognize its value. Around Taurus, some people begin adjusting how they respond to life. They no longer reply to messages instantly just to avoid missing an opportunity. They stop feeling the need to appear busy. They learn how to slow down without feeling left behind. The attraction isn't about novelty, it's about rhythm. And when two heartbeats find a steady balance, staying no longer feels like a gamble. It feels like lowering an anchor into the water after years of drifting. From the outside, that choice may look surprising. Someone might ask, why leave something that seems stable? Why change when everything looks fine? But the person inside the experience understands something quieter. Fine doesn't always mean aligned. Aligned can be as simple as taking a deep breath without fear of judgment. It can be knowing that if one day you feel weak, someone will remain steady beside you. And little by little, the old races fade into the distance, not because they were wrong, but because another way of living, lighter, steadier, is slowly being chosen. And when something is chosen often enough, it begins to shift the center of a person's life, even before they fully realize it. For many people, success once sat at the very top. Packed calendars, back-to-back meetings, plans arranged down to the minute. Busyness can start to feel like proof of worth. If you're not running, maybe you're falling behind. But somewhere inside that rhythm, a different kind of connection appears. Not dramatic, not something that flips everything overnight. Just this: when they're around someone with Taurus energy, they don't feel the need to display their strongest side. One evening after work, instead of talking about achievements, they talk about exhaustion. Instead of outlining big plans, they admit they're unsure. And strangely, that admission doesn't make them smaller, it makes them lighter. Taurus doesn't demand to be chosen. They don't issue ultimatums. They simply live steadily and honestly, like a lamp left on in the house, even if no one notices the switch. That presence feels like a gentle mirror. It doesn't reflect a polished image. It reflects what's real. And when someone sees themselves in that mirror, including the parts that aren't perfect, their thinking begins to change. Is what I'm chasing actually nourishing me? Or am I just staying inside a role that's become too familiar? Those questions don't require immediate answers. They rest there, in the quiet between two people. In the way an eye contact doesn't break when the story becomes vulnerable. In the way no one rushes to change the subject when the truth feels fragile. There's something profoundly different about being seen without being judged. You don't have to be fine all the time. You don't have to be strong to be loved. I've noticed that when someone begins to feel accepted like that, they change how they speak about the future. Before, the future was about rising numbers, promotions, milestones to reach by a certain age. Later, the future starts being described in feeling. A home filled with evening laughter, a meal without checking a phone, someone sitting across from you and truly listening. The center of life shifts, from achieving to experiencing, from proving to feeling. This shift isn't always smooth. There's tension, moments of wondering whether too much is being released, which I can feel like standing between two shores, one side offering familiar security, the other offering a connection that promises nothing except sincerity. But then, in very small moments, like the end of a long day, when you know someone is waiting with quiet steadiness, the choice becomes clearer. Not because the other person is perfect, not because the relationship is without challenge, but because feeling in the right place makes the old rhythm less appealing. Maybe that's why this great resignation isn't a storm. It's more like a current shifting beneath the surface, gentle, yet strong enough to change a boat's direction. Spend enough time near a Taurus, and you may realize you don't have to climb the highest mountain to feel enough. Sometimes, having a place to return to, an eye that doesn't turn away when you're vulnerable, can quietly redefine what success means. And once the center has shifted, decisions that once caused hesitation start to feel different. No longer sacrifice, no longer loss, just a step closer to a life that softens your heart when you imagine it. If you're a Taurus, you may not even recognize the role you've played in that transformation. You're simply living the way you always have, slow, steady, understated. Yet sometimes, that calm becomes the reason someone finds the courage to choose their life again. And when someone chooses their life again because of the peace you bring, that isn't pressure, it's resonance. A resonance deep enough to quietly shift the center of everything. When the center shifts, people begin to look again at the things they once placed at the very top. Not to deny the past, not to dismiss what they've built, but to understand more clearly what truly holds them and what has simply become habit. The great resignation can sound like collapse, like a door slamming shut, like decisions made in a rush of emotion. But sometimes it feels more like the tide pulling back from the shore at sunset. The water retreats slowly, and when the sand is revealed, you begin to notice seashells, footprints, things that were always there but somehow went unseen. Spend enough time near a Taurus, and the feeling of home begins to appear in a very simple way. No sign outside, no grand announcement, just familiarity forming through small things. The way you're greeted when you walk into a room, the way your stories are remembered, the way silence isn't mistaken for distance. Home isn't always perfection. Sometimes it's simply the place where you can sit down without holding your back straight for too long. The place where you don't have to choose every word carefully to avoid being misunderstood. The place where you can take a deep breath without feeling like you're in someone's way. In a world where everyone is trying to prove they're worthy of a title, a salary, admiration, simple acceptance becomes rare. No one hands you a trophy for being loved as you are, but your body knows. Your shoulders drop, your breathing slows, your heartbeat softens. And when that sense of fullness rises from within, old choices begin to lose their weight. Not because they were wrong, not because anyone forced you to walk away, but because your heart leans toward what feels more real. Some people once believed they would never change. They built their lives carefully, brick by brick, everything placed exactly where it belonged. And then they realized they had built so many walls, they forgot to leave windows open. Near a Taurus, it can feel like someone quietly opens one, not to escape, but to see the sky differently. Letting go, at that point, no longer feels dramatic. It feels more like rearranging a room, removing what no longer serves you, keeping what brings warmth. You may hesitate when picking up an old object because it holds memory, but when you finally set it down, the empty space that appears carries a lightness that's hard to describe. Around Taurus energy, people begin to understand that peace isn't the absence of movement. It's movement at a rhythm that doesn't exhaust you. It's knowing that even if tomorrow changes, there is still a grounding presence that doesn't shake easily. And once someone has touched that kind of peace, letting go no longer feels like sacrifice. It feels like stepping closer to a life that feels more authentic. No announcement needed, no dramatic explanation, just a quiet choice made with clarity. From the outside, others may not understand why someone would leave what looks stable. But for the person living it, true stability isn't always what's visible. It lives in the feeling of belonging. And when someone finds a place where they truly belong, even without a sign, even without display, they may find the courage to walk through that great resignation, not to lose everything, but to move closer to the version of themselves they want to live beside every single day. And maybe that is the deepest meaning hidden inside the phrase, the great resignation. Not loud loss, not decisions that demand the world's attention, but a quiet moment. Someone sitting alone in their room, looking at the life they've built, and asking themselves, what truly brings me peace when I close my eyes? Maybe they once believed they needed more achievements, more recognition. But after enough long days, after enough moments of holding themselves together, they begin to realize that fullness can sometimes come from something very simple, a connection that doesn't exhaust them. If you are a Taurus, you may have never intended to create that kind of shift. You're simply living the way that feels right to you, loyal, steady, understated. You don't compete. You don't cling. You don't force anyone to stay. And yet, that steadiness can feel like a door always open, not glowing, not advertised, just there, waiting for someone calm enough to walk through. And once someone experiences what it feels like to be beside a person who doesn't require them to perform, to defend themselves, to keep running, they begin to reconsider what once stood at the top of their list. They might stay on their old path. They might choose a different direction. There's no right or wrong answer here, only choices that feel more aligned with the rhythm of their heart right now. What feels most beautiful in this story isn't how much someone is willing to let go of. It's that someone pauses long enough to truly listen to themselves. Sometimes, and in the middle of all the noise out there, your quiet presence may have become a kind of anchor without you ever realizing it. So if you look at your life right now, is there a place where your heart softens? Is there someone or something that makes you feel you don't have to keep running? And if reflections like this resonate with you in some quiet way, you're always welcome to stay connected here. Not to believe anything blindly, but to share these slower, more human perspectives on life and love. For now, just take a few seconds of silence and listen to your own heartbeat.